Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Colm Flynn podcast. It's been 21 months since Russia invaded Ukraine, and when the war first broke out, millions were fleeing the country, and only a few people were going into it. They were mainly humanitarian workers and reporters. But one man from Bray in Ireland named Finn Boylan grabbed his camera, jumped in his van and drove to Ukraine. And over the next 5 months, he would capture this incredible footage of the reality of life in a country fighting for its survival, up close and personal. His footage is gripping, it's real, and it shows the tragic toll of this war. And now, the man behind the camera tells his story about why he first went to Ukraine.
Now it's a 10-hour drive away from my home. And now I am poised and in position with the experience and the capabilities to play my part in that history.
What it was like when he first arrived.
Everything was shaking, and as night fell, I just saw the horizon just lighting up with explosions like fireworks. And I was like,
what have I got myself into? How he operated as a cameraman there.
The stationary target is a dead target, so you just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving.
What struck him about the Ukrainian fighters he met?
They fight for each other for the last drop of blood, and they do anything to save each other at their own life, at their own expense.
And the impact this experience has had on him as a person.
I heard a fantastic quote while I was out there. It says, every man has two lives, and the second one starts when he realizes he only has one.
This is the Colm Flynn podcast, and my guest today is Finn Boylan. And I started by asking Finn about his recent wedding just after returning from Ukraine.
I'm dealing with it, still dealing with a little bit of PTSD from my own wedding. You know, 7 months on the front line in Ukraine is nothing compared to a 3-day Irish wedding.
That's hilarious.
Anyway, we're over the line now. She's my wife. There's no turning back.
Yeah. And Finn, come here. You were dating for 4 years, isn't that right?
Yes, correct.
Did some part of you, because you were in Ukraine and you saw how life can be so fragile and it can end like that, did some part of that push you to say, let's not mess around anymore and push? Because, you know, some people just push off weddings for years and years. Did any of that play into it? Say, let's go home, just get married?
A lot of it did, actually, Colm. I heard a fantastic quote while I was out there. It says, every man has two lives, and the second one starts when he realizes he only has one. And I'm 31 years of age. I entered Ukraine in early March 2022 at the start of the war. Still kind of on the cusp of the end of my, you could say, 20s, adolescent years, where I kind of thought I was invincible and infallible and, nothing could stop me. This kind of, the Battle of Kiev kind of coincided with my father's illness. My father was getting a serious amount of chemotherapy, and he was in a really bad way, and he's an absolute unit of a man. He's 6'4", 100 kilos, always someone I looked up to. And I'll never forget, I have a recording of it here. Well, anyway, GoPro recording from my helmet where I'm standing in the devastation of Bucha with bodies everywhere. And I get a message from my mother, and she's telling me to call my dad because he's going in for his first round of chemo. And I've never shown him that recording, actually. I will do one day. But a very sobering moment for me where, I was just realizing, like, Jesus, like, life is fragile, and here there's death all around me and destruction all around me, and there's my dad, on the cusp of it himself. And yeah, to answer your question, with Martha, my wife, she's believed in me from day one, when nobody else would, and coming back, there was no beating around the bush anymore. It was like, this is what I'm sure of, this is what I want, and I'm not wasting any time anymore because life is short, and I enjoy my best moments for the last 4 years have been with her. Even the arguments with her have been the best arguments of my life that have only pushed my character forward and made me a better person. So yeah,
I've never heard that one before. That's a good one. These have been some of the best arguments of my life. Carlsberg don't do arguments, but if they did. Come here, I'm going to get into it in a moment, just a bit about your background, filmmaking, and how you ended up in Ukraine as an Irishman. But that's interesting that you were there in the middle of war, while back at home, your family was kind of facing and fighting its own war with your dad and his battle with cancer. Did any part of you think, oh, why am I here involved in this war when I've got my own battle to fight back home in Ireland and help my dad fight that?
I mean, like I left Ireland when I was 23, so a long time ago, and I kind of been floating around the world for quite a while. In my parents' eyes, kind of drifting would be the word that they would use to describe it. But I would kind of classify it as looking for meaning and looking for purpose and direction, and a lot of argument. I'm the firstborn of my family, eldest son. I don't know, maybe you can vouch for the fact that there's a lot of pressure when it comes to being the firstborn of an Irish family. There's a lot of expectation to follow the same methods or the same formula that made them successful, to give you that life. And they would see what I'm doing or the answers that I'm searching for as a means of squandering that opportunity. But really, I was only ever looking for those answers and that purpose, that meaning, what they found here. But I felt the need to go look for elsewhere. That drove me to live in Germany for years, or spend a year in Africa, or months in Asia, and with my history background and history and politics that I studied in UCD, combined with my filmmaking masters, going out and searching for disputed territories, experiencing places on the map that are, as Google puts, the dotted line that is, disputed. And I kind of found my purpose in, discovering these geographical places that nobody ever heard of, that actually have such significance for, the global order, or how countries interact with each other, or how ethnic groups manage each other as neighbors. It was all fascinating to me. So that was kind of my process. But to go back to your question of when my father was sick, that was kind of like the culmination of all of those questions, of all of those journeys, of all of those searches for meaning. And I guess I kind of found it, because at the end of all of that, after seeing the Battle of Kiev, which was one of the most insane experiences of my life, there was only one place I wanted to be at the end of all that, which was, despite all the guff that me and my father might have had growing up in my adolescence or early 20s, at the end of it all, I just wanted to come and give him a hug. And I'm sure you're aware of how Irish families operate. We would rather slag each other off than actually compliment each other and tell each other that we love each other. So it was kind of a hard dynamic with me and my father, but eventually at the end of it all, when I came back, there was a respect there, and I had a respect for him for what he was going through. And at the end of the day, it was an unspoken love, and just gave each other a big hug. And it was or still is a beautiful moment for me. And even when he gave a speech at my wedding last week, it was what he would say to the whole room was something he would never say to me one-on-one in private. So it was like, it's kind of like that final combination of, you're my firstborn son, I respect you, I love you, and thank you for being here. And it's the same feeling that I had towards him after he'd survived his chemo and is doing better. His hair's all grown back. Great. It's great to have him around, So
how's his cancer now? Is it?
Well, he actually has MS, multiple sclerosis, and it's the worst kind. It's progressive degenerative, so only 10% of people with MS get this type. So it's basically like a downward spiral until he's always going to be there in the head, but his whole body will fail him. His whole body will fail him before that. And for a man that's bigger than me, 10 kilos more than me, that would always make me aware of that, it's kind of difficult to watch him degenerate in that capacity, but it's fantastic to see that degeneration slow down to the point that doctors said he was diagnosed 2017, so that's 6 years ago, and they said he would be in a wheelchair and immobile within 4 or 5 years, and he's on a stick. He was dancing at my wedding last week, giving it socks on the dance floor. It was absolutely great to see him in such high spirits.
Please God, he'll have plenty more years of dancing in him as well. And but I know, tough. Yeah, when it's your parents, it's tough. It's just really, really tough.
That's it. I mean, like, I wasted so much time trying to run away from that expectation or be valued in the eyes of that expectation. And now there's kind of an underlying sense of respect. And like my original quote that I told you that I heard in Ukraine is, every man realizes, yes, every man has two lives. The second starts when he realizes he only had one. And all I want to do now, after everything that I've been through, everything that I've seen, nearly getting killed twice, and all the death and destruction and suffering, is the realization that, life can change in a heartbeat, like really, like in a heartbeat. So appreciate the people that are around you, appreciate the people that love you, and give them 10 times the love back, because you don't know where they're going to go. And, you know, I know people that I've met in Ukraine that are now dead, people that I shared, broke bread with, people that I smoked with, that drank with, that are now no longer here. So, I mean, why waste any time anymore? Why waste any time anymore with all of your, excuse my Italian, excuse my French, Italian, all this bullshit of ego and all this crap.
It is truly liberating when you do realize how fragile life is. I remember being at Mass once and the priest giving a great sermon, and he said, let's think about all the people who are dying suddenly today, an unexpected death, millions around the world for whatever reason. And he said, we have this idea that it's a given that tomorrow morning we wake up, like we just know it's a given. He said, it's not a given. There is no guarantee. He said, your next breath is not a given. Anything could happen at any time. He said, so just to think that way, you just look at the world a lot differently. But about you, Finn, so you're Irish, you're from Dublin, you're a filmmaker as well as being a student of history and politics. So how did you end up deciding one day when the war broke out in Ukraine that you wanted to grab your camera and head to what was then one of the most dangerous places on the face of the planet?
It didn't kind of come out of the blue. It was kind of a combination of a lot of things, Colin. I've been kind of a nomad for many years before that. Prior to the corona, COVID in 2020, for most of 2019, I was in West Africa. And I had driven my Land Rover from Ireland to West Africa, a journey of nearly 40,000 kilometers, about 30,000 in Africa itself. Spent a bit of time in Mali, driving around, encountered French military checkpoints in Timbuktu with an Irish reg, with Cork registration. I got chased through the jungles of Guinea by bandits, was shot at, extorted, ripped off, stripped down, AKs in my face.
This sounds like a weekend in Dublin, Finn.
Things aren't that bad as much as the media would like to paint it, but sure, you give someone a stern look, everything's all right. Just kind of like the realization down there, like your vehicle breaks, you got to fix it. You know, there ain't a mechanic for another 2 days drive, and even if you arrive at that mechanic, you know, what are they going to do for you? They don't have the spare part. You know, it's just this kind of, no one's coming to save you realization. You know, it's all on your own back. And a lot of those situations happened, and they all kind of climaxed with having a 45-minute chase through the jungles of Guinea by bandits on the back of a Toyota Hilux. They were I was in a Land Rover Defender. They were in a Toyota Hilux, so you could it almost sounds like an ad for Toyota or Defender. Who was the better off-road vehicle? And there was a bunch of bandits in the back of the Toyota with AKs, but the road was so bad. I mean, no tarmac. You're talking craters in the dirt road the size of bombs, craters that you'd see in Ukraine. So you could only go first gear, second gear, and then you hit a massive hole, first gear, second gear. So imagine this kind of scenario in the jungles for 45 minutes with them shooting in the air out of the back of the Toyota Hilux because they couldn't shoot straight out of the back of the pickup because they'd shoot themselves. So that all culminated in eventually getting caught and extorted and ripped off. And anyway, long story short.
Whoa, hey, Finn, I didn't see that coming.
Anyway, I speak French, managed to bribe my way out of the situation while pretending I had no money. Anyway, gave them what they needed, some solar panel off the top of my vehicle, and told them that they could power their whole village from this solar panel. This
is a nuclear reactor, folks.
No, it was absolutely mental. But all of these experiences kind of, gave me confidence. Gave me the realization that, no one's coming to save me. You have to, whatever shit you put yourself in, you have to get yourself out of.
Yeah, but Finn, you said that it gave you a level of confidence, but it probably was it not this stupid, dangerous level of confidence that, you dodge the bullets a few times, you go through areas where that Russian mercenary group, the Wagner group are, and different armed forces. But your luck runs out in these places. I know I was in South Sudan last year because the Pope went there, and we went with an entourage and with security, but it's not the kind of place I would risk staying in much longer, because the longer you stay, the more you drive around, the higher the risk is that you're going to get in serious trouble or killed. So it gave you this confidence, but was it kind of...
situational awareness as well. It's not just blind confidence. It's, you know, the ability to read the room, the ability to read the situation, you know, realizing that you are a white man, you do stick out like a sore thumb. You got to be aware of who's looking at you, what their agenda might be. You know, those shifty eyes that are looking at you, do they pick up a phone? After all these kind of little cues that go around you. I always had a philosophy down there, was never stay in a place more than 48 hours. And just keep moving. And that's also a philosophy that I learned in Ukraine, is a stationary target is a dead target. So you just keep moving. But all of these kind of things in Africa kind of not only gave me the confidence, gave me the situational awareness, gave me the ability to dig myself out of whatever situation I found myself in and just keep going.
But then why, you were watching the news like everyone else, you were getting it on your phone, the war broke out in Ukraine, and why did you think, okay, I've been through these crazy experiences in West Africa, and I get it, you think, you feel a little bit invincible, whether it's warranted or not, but you think, I've survived these situations and scenarios, I'll be able to go in, and I'll be fine in Ukraine. Why did you want to go and take your camera with you?
So when the war broke out in February 2022, it was like all those roads had led to that moment where, you know, I had my vehicle, the same one I tore around Africa with, the one I got shot at in the jungles of Guinea. I had my camera and the experience of filmmaking that I've got my master's in, so there's a bit of legitimacy there. Oh, and the border with Ukraine is a 10-hour drive away. It's nothing. I'd be there in a day. It was just kind of like, and that kind of same realization that this is world changing. Like, they will talk about this in 2 or 3 generations to come as the moment where the long peace that we've enjoyed since the end of World War II till now in Europe is coming to an end. I mean, the wars were in Mali, Syria, Nagorno-Karabakh, Iraq, Afghanistan, always on the periphery of Europe, far away from our minds. Now it's coming to our doorstep. Now it's a 10-hour drive away from my home. I have a personal connection to this conflict, following it since its outbreak. And now I am poised and in position with the experience and the capabilities to play my part in that history. And that's why I pulled the trigger and went for it.
So I know from being in Ukraine a few times over the last 2 years myself, and not easy to get into, even though you can drive to the border, especially at the beginning, just the chaos, the traffic jams, the tailback for miles going in from Poland into Ukraine because of all the humanitarian aid going in and TV crews and what have you. But so you arrive, you get to the border, you drive across. Do you have someone to meet? Do you know how to connect with the military there? Like, how did you know to go in and get situated?
I went totally blind, Colin. Blind faith. But look, I knew that Lviv, I'm sure you've been there yourself. Lviv is far away from the front line. The distance between Lviv and the front line is 1,200 kilometers. That's the same distance from Lviv to Milan. You know, and that's 4 countries, 4 languages. It's a huge space. So I knew going in to Lviv, I'm very far away from the front line. Even though Kiev was the front line at that time, that's still 5 hours drive away, 5 or 6 hours drive away on a good day. So I knew that the only thing that would probably knock me out would be unlucky enough to be in the vicinity of a cruise missile strike, which that was my first taste of the war. It was a cruise missile strike on a fuel depot, and I managed to capture that. And after that, I was just hungry for more. And the battle for Kiev was raging, and I knew there was nothing really to do here in Lviv, or there in Lviv. There was just, humanitarians buzzing around, all, navel gazing, as you might say. And I realized that, the battle for Kiev is raging, and, Kiev might fall in a couple of days, and to have footage from those final moments of the state or the defeat of Russia would be, crucial to the kind of narrative of this historical event. So found one Irishman that was going in there, and I followed them in there, and so the story goes. And
when you get to Lviv, and then you decide to drive to Kiev, because I know the trains, I got the train there a few times, and the train is maybe 8 hours from Lviv into Kiev. And the trains, the amazing thing about the trains is they kept on running. They're kind of the unsung heroes of the war. They kept on going, their rhythm, the regular rhythm throughout the battles. But you drove in, there's landmines all around Kiev. That's where the battles were fought, trying to get into the center of the city. What was it like when you were approaching, or what was your first sign of, I'm in a country at war in front of you? Like, what did you see on the horizon?
Well, I didn't actually drive. I took the train, actually. And I arrived in Kiev on around the 23rd of March. And I was traveling there with one Irish man from Wicklow, also from Kilcool. He was a mechanic. And I'll never forget, it was an overnight train, and we arrived in Kyiv Central Station at, I think it was about 6 in the morning. We got off on the platform, and the Irish fella was playing the whole journey, whiskey in the jar. The whole journey, kind of trying to lighten the mood. Absolute character, always having the crack, always a smile on his face, always bringing everyone's spirits up. And I'll never forget though, we got off the platform and we start walking up towards the security post, and there's soldiers and police really tense, you know, like guys that are, it's 3 weeks into the war now. The Russians have been at the gates for 3 weeks, and they start searching our bags frantically, like, you know, checking everything. Start pulling out knives, big, knives like this size, you know, out of the lads' bags, you know, and it's okay, go pass, and they're checking my press credentials, and as he's checking my press credentials, a missile flies over our heads and hits maybe like 2 kilometers maybe away from us, and the whole, like, we all duck, all of us newbies fresh off the train, duck down. Huge explosion, everything's vibrating. The window that was overlooking the platform of where the train was that we just got off, the window that had tape, brown duct tape on it, X over it, because, you know, if you tape a window, the less likely that it will shatter. That was vibrating like hell, and I thought it was going to break on top of me as we ducked down. But the policeman that was searching my bags, he had my passport and my press credentials in his hand in that moment, and he just kept flicking looking for the entry stamp, like it was just another day at work, like, you know. And that moment gave me 2 things. It made me realize that despite having been in Mali or Nagorno-Karabakh or, you know, any of these, you know, hostile environments, you could call it, I'd never been in a real war. This was the real deal, and here was a guy that had seen so much already, and here was me thinking that I had all the confidence from Africa and all my experiences behind me to get me to this point. And that was a moment that I realized I was a total war virgin, and this guy was just like another day at work. I think it's kind of it's probably not a good idea. It's probably at your own risk, but just watch out for munitions, you know. You know, I'm watching the camera, so if you know what to look for. So if you see anything, let me know, please. Oh, of course.
Sometimes I know when people are in work mode or filming with a camera, they kind of go into this tunnel vision. Okay, I'm here to get the shots or to do this. Or was another part of you thinking, okay, as people were kind of thinking at the start of the war, the Russian army is far superior, far larger than the Ukrainians. This is going to be over quickly, and the whole thing is going to be game over unless a miracle happens. Now, the miracle did happen. They're still holding out, which is incredible. But what was going through your mind?
Oh, yeah, I definitely did have the tunnel vision at the beginning. I mean, like, I had tunnel vision all the way to that platform. And that was kind of a bit of a rude awakening for me. But still, after that, I mean, I had my contacts, other filmmaking contacts that I had met at film festivals in Germany, Ukrainian guys. So I immediately contacted them. Keep moving, and keep trying to, you know, get the shots that I want. Eventually, the Irish fella and the 2 foreign fighters that he was with were staying in a hotel in Maidan. I don't know if you know it. It's the Kozatsky Hotel. Do you know where the supermarket is under the ground? You have the underground shopping centre underneath Maidan Square.
We stayed in the one, there's a casino in it. I forget the name of it. It's I flinch when I say this. It's a 5-star hotel, but it's one of the only ones that all the journalists were staying in because
that's up the hill. That's up the hill beside Maria San Sofia, the monastery, right?
Yeah, and it's got a big basement, and that's why they book it for when we go in. Yeah.
Oh, we joked actually. All of the proper journalists are up there, so you got your CNN, CBC, BBC, Al Jazeera. All the proper journalists are up there, and then you have all the tier 2 journalists and freelancers down the hill on Kozatsky Hotel with a mix of a bunch of foreign fighters and a load of blow-ins of humanitarians. So,
well, that's why I know we're lucky, because people say, "Oh, Colm, you're brave to go to Ukraine," and it is it takes courage to do it, but I know at the same time we were afforded all these luxuries that most people don't have, collected by an ambassador's car to skip the queue into this.
I didn't have any of that, Colin. I had
yeah,
none
no,
of that.
I know you've none of that. That's why I'm like, you know, we're in a privileged position, so we're not facing the same reality as everyone else when we go in to capture and do the reports. The kind of reality that you're facing. That's why I'm fascinated about what was driving you.
I didn't know, like, really, I didn't know. I remember I said goodbye to the Irish band, the two foreign fighters. They had a bunch of meetings to join up certain units that I couldn't tag along to. So I kind of activated my Ukrainian contacts that I've met, filmmakers that I've met at other film festivals, and I was bounced around Safehouse to Safehouse, and I remember I was put into a Safehouse. I call it a Safehouse because it was owned by a previous banker who fled the country. So it was like he had like a vault door for his front door, and then a second vault door for his, you know, proper security. However, it was on like the 7th floor on the northwest outskirts of Kyiv, that was directly facing the front line, which is about 6 kilometers away. And I'll never forget, that was my first night. He dropped me there and then he left, and he said, I'll be back for you in the morning. And I had one night with the ginger cat that had been abandoned by the banker who owned this place. He'd abandoned it and fled, left the cat there with a bunch of food, and the cat was so happy to see me. And night fell and the windows started shaking. Of course, they had the brown tape trying to stop them being shattered by the blast, and everything was shaking. And as night fell, I just saw the horizon just lighting up with explosions like fireworks. And I was like, this is not a good place to be. I'm alone. I am in this 7th floor of the building. I'm about 8 kilometers from the front line, and I'm facing the front line in a high-rise building. I was like, bro, please come back and collect me ASAP first thing in the morning. Anyway, he did anyway, and I got bounced to another safe house. And, you know, I tried to find a fixer in that period. He introduced me to a fixer that had the military contacts. So I was kind of working on this access. And then I decided, hey, I'm better at safety in numbers, right? So I'm going to go meet up with the guys that I traveled in with, and the Irish guy and the American and the Swede that stayed in Maidan in the center in Kozatsky Hotel. And I ended up staying with them. And yeah, I was chronically aware, based on their reports, they were getting off the units that they were looking to join, was that, you know, the Russians could break through at any time. And I really, for the first time in all of my, you know, experiences, whether it be in Africa or Iran or Karabakh or Palestine, any of these hostile environments, you know, inverted commas, that I'd been in, this was the first time I really had to look at myself and go, holy Jesus, this city is surrounded on 3 sides. I came in via the only corridor open. What happens if I wake up in the morning at 6 a.m. and there's a Russian T-72 tank sitting there in the middle of Maidan Square, blowing everything to pieces? I mean, what's my contingency plan when the trains have stopped running, when the Russians have taken the station? And I really, for one of the only times in my life, I was sitting there being like, oh my God.
What have I got myself into?
What have I got myself into? Because there was no escape. If the Russians broke through, took the station, central station, and got into Maidan, and the government fell, and Ukraine fell, you know, I'm an Irish journalist with a camera. Like, what's going to happen to me?
You're not on the top of the priority list as someone to try and help. And it's the same with us, when, even though we had all those things afforded to us as help and ambassadors helping us and all that, we were told before we went in, if things get really bad, there's not much that an embassy can do for you. You know,
sure, the Irish embassy had already shut shop and gone home. There was no Irish embassy there. There was no embassies there. Like Kyiv at the time, I'll never forget, because I've been back to Kyiv. So I've been 7 months in Ukraine overall at different points, but nothing compares to what Kyiv was like in the very beginning. I mean, there wasn't a single civilian. There was no civilians. There was press and body armor, armed military, or armed militia on the streets, like guys that had just, you know, served in Afghanistan in the 80s who pulled out their, or, you know, dudes that are hunting. Like, everybody was armed to the teeth. There was nobody. And I remember, like, sitting in the Kozatsky Hotel with the Irish fella, and he was talking about, like, Putin maybe nuking the place. What happens if they drop a tactical nuke? And, like, that paranoia, you know, it was pure paranoia in the beginning. Nobody knew how far were the Russians were, because there was reports that they had got into the city, that they crossed the river, that they were at the gates, and of course there's military secrecy. You don't want to create a panic amongst the military, so everything's really tight-lipped. And it was only when I started to go out to the front, after getting the fixer, after getting the driver, after getting the contacts and the access, and going out to the front and seeing the work the Ukrainians had put in, that they'd definitely broken the back of the Russian assault. Devastation like I'd never seen before, like burned bodies in the tanks, decapitated heads all over the streets. Civilians.
When you first saw a body on the street, a young guy like yourself, if that's what it was, what did you think, or how did it affect you?
One interesting thing that happens when you see, this amount of dismembered bodies and death in such a violent way, is that you actually kind of your instincts just take over, and you're like the hairs on your neck, the back of your neck stand up. You're not really anything emotional at all. You're not emotional at all. You're just awake. It's like you've just done the biggest shot of coffee mixed with Red Bull and whatever, anything else uppers you could take. You're just completely alert. And it's almost like the smell and the sight of dismembered bodies of your own species gives you this animalistic part of your brain just activates, and it's like alert. It's the fight or flight, isn't it? It's there's no emotion in it, Colin. There's nothing. It's just alert. I remember, I look back at my footage now, and a lot of it is kind of shaky because of the adrenaline that was running through my hands, and a warp stabilizer on Premiere Pro and After Effects or whatever doesn't really do the job. The effect it had on me, I don't know what the effect, I can't speak to the effects that it had on me, because I don't know, it's so much has happened since that moment. And
it will probably take you a long time to analyze it. These things, you might think you're not affected straight away and that you were in this instinctual fight or flight mode, but it's in years to come when maybe you're jolted awake at night or something like that. That's where we hear about PTSD and all that. But the soldiers that you met, Finn, when you went to the front line and you met these Ukrainian soldiers, most of them young men who had been drafted in to fight, what were the guys like that you met? Were they afraid? Were they scared?
In the beginning, Colin, in Kiev, nobody was drafted. Everybody was a volunteer. Everybody was a volunteer, and there was nobody there that didn't want to be there. Anybody that didn't want to be there fled or got out into Poland before Zelensky shut the borders for fighting age men. And one of the quotes that stick with me from the Battle of Kiev, from a 65-year-old man that could have probably left, they looked at us like dogs. They thought they could exterminate us like dogs, but they failed to realize that every dog is a lion in his own home. And everybody that fought there in the beginning in Kiev wanted to be there. There was no civilians there, Colin. There was no civilians. There was nothing. There wasn't a shop open. There was nothing. You couldn't even get cigarettes.
The guys that you met, so they had this kind of courageous, fearless attitude towards what was going on, or were they just regular guys that you would see moments of weakness as well, missing home, missing their parents, or... I mean, what were these men like?
At the beginning, there was no time for that, Colin. There was no time to think. It was just action, move. I mean, the enemy's at the gates. You don't know if there's going to be a Ukraine tomorrow. It was such a fluid situation. There was also no control of journalists properly. So, my ability to move in and out of these areas is not like what you've experienced in Ukraine since then. It was just total, absolute free-for-all. In the beginning of a conflict, it's just total mess. Nobody knows what's going on, where it's going on, and who it's happening to. So it was just an absolute information overload, conflicting reports. Your mind is awash with paranoia, speculation, stress, and what is the truth. But I just kind of, again, found comfort in that tunnel vision.
Did you have a gun with you, by the way?
Never, no. Never had a gun. Well, what am I going to do with a gun? I only shoot 16:9 frame format.
Hey, keeping the lightness in the shade. I like that. Let me ask you about, you said trying to understand what's real and what's not. Were you hearing lots of disinformation on both sides or just on one side, or how were you able to balance all that kind of truth and lies in your head?
The Ukrainian military really wanted all press to go there and film this and film this and film this. And I really don't like being associated with the the quick soundbite journalists. You know, there's a kind of a sense of soullessness I get off them. You know, it's like they don't actually care about the people. They're just there for the shot, the soundbite, wrap it up, package it, and send it to the studio. It has a serious lack of taste in my eyes. And that's why when I'm out there, I identify myself as a filmmaker, documentary. I'm in it for the long haul. I'm looking for my characters. I want to get to know my characters. I want to follow their journey, their struggle, their triumphs and their failures. So I would identify myself as this, because there's a lot of hostility towards press because of this distastefulness that they can have. And unfortunately, like the Ukrainian military, when Bucha was liberated, was like, go here and look at this mass grave. And there was this kind of fetishization of this kind of death, and I just didn't like it. So I wanted to get my own answers. So I moved north and I went to Vosil, where no media went to. And I was the first journalist any of these people had seen since liberation. Liberation was only about 2 days before, 48 hours before. The last people they had seen was the Ukrainian military 12 hours ago that had pushed north. And because I was the first one into the town with my fixer, their hearts were open to me, their eyes were open, and they just told me all their stories. And they just took me around all of the graves of the people that they buried, the Russians had executed. And one was a 14-year-old boy that when the Russians arrived, they were all cowering in the basement of the house, like a whole community, like four houses, because one neighbor had a big basement that could house, you know, a couple of families. And the Russians arrived and they threw a smoke grenade into the basement and smoked the people out to get them to come out. And the 14-year-old boy thought it was a live grenade, and he ran out of up the stairs and out the door. And as soon as he came out, there was basically a firing squad waiting for him, and they gunned him down. And all the family members and the neighbors were telling me this story, you know, word for word, verbatim, showing me his grave, showing me his phone, showing me his bloody jacket where the bullet went through, where the blood is all there. I have all of this on my hard drive, Colin. I have all of this stuff that's never been seen. It's all sitting on this hard drive, you know. These are war crimes that nobody's ever seen, you know. So yeah, there was especially in the beginning, I think the Russians came down and they thought they could get away with anything because there would not be a Kiev tomorrow. So they just butchered their way through everything. And when the Ukrainians started fighting back, they butchered their way back. I saw Russian guys with no heads, you know. I saw lads that were missing parts of their bodies that shouldn't be missed, that, you know, a normal bullet wouldn't do it, or shrapnel wouldn't do it. What the Russians did far outweigh anything that I saw that the Ukrainians did, and put it that way. But yeah, war is hell, and it's a grey zone, you know. It's not black or white. It never is.
Did you meet any Russian soldiers that had been captured or maybe surrendered?
No, I've never seen a living Russian in Ukraine. I've only seen dead Russians in Ukraine. And that's actually quite normal. If you speak to a lot of fighters, a lot of them will tell you that they've actually never seen the enemy. They've never seen the enemy because you generally don't, you know. You might get a glimpse of them and open fire. And I've heard a lot of guys say the same, like guys who are on the 0-0 line, they've never seen the enemy. They just hear that, they just get the blowback. They've only seen the dead ones.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing that you never get that close where you would see them, or even see, like, you know, I'm thinking World War II or something, heads above the trenches, but you hear
there are moments. I mean, like, if you look at the footage that you can see coming out from the 3rd Assault Brigade, the 3rd Assault Brigade that is now, prior to that, it was called Azov Brigade. A lot of their footage on YouTube is unbelievable, like GoPro combat footage. And they're storming trenches. Their specific role is storming trenches, but even when they're storming, they're within 20 meters of the enemy. But they might get ahead and a gun coming up above the trench, but you won't ever, like, very rarely will, unless you're like hand-to-hand combat in the trenches fighting for inches, very rarely do you get that close to the enemy. I've never been to the front line. The closest I've ever been is 2 kilometers away. I've never been to the 0-0-0 line, which is like right there within a couple of 100 meters. And even those guys would only say that they rarely see the enemy, if ever, you know.
I don't want to keep you too much longer because you've been very generous with your time, but a few finally questions.
I'll hold you there. I need to roll a cigarette after all this. Hold on. Let me...
Roll a cigarette. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll sing a song here while he rolls the cigarette.
No, it's just a lot to recount, Colm. It's a year and a half ago, and I don't get this level of time with, you know, any radio interviews I do, you know, so it's very snappy soundbite, but you're actually interested in getting down to the bones and the crux of a lot of it. So I'm, you know, having to dig into my memory and bring a lot of stuff out, that stuff that I haven't even looked at my hard drive for a long time. So
now I feel guilty, Finn.
No, you're all right, man. No, it's good.
Give me a soundbite in 20 seconds or less of what your experience for 7 months in Ukraine was like. 20 seconds. I'm joking. Welcome back to CNN. Your view of humanity when you go in somewhere like that, it's like when I go somewhere around the world covering Pope Francis, which I do now, the day job, and you see kind of the very best of people sometimes, whether it's those religious who have given their life to helping the most disabled in an orphanage or in a soup kitchen, or, you know, you come away from it feeling uplifted because you've seen the very best in people, and it rubs off you and it inspires you. But when you're somewhere like that and you're seeing dead bodies, burnt bodies, and constant fighting with no end in sight, how does it change your view on humanity?
For me, war brings out the very best and the very worst in people. I mean, there's no stronger bond between individuals in the world in any capacity than what I've seen in trenches in Ukraine between dudes that didn't know each other 4 months ago. You know, there's something to be said about sharing a trench with an individual, and it's just amazing the spirit that they have for each other. They fight for each other for the last drop of blood, and they do anything to save each other at their own life, at their own expense. It's amazing. It's amazing what humans can feel for each other and the distances that we'll go to save each other. But that only comes out in the most horrific of circumstances that should never happen, you know. And I don't know, it's an incredibly sobering, incredibly humbling, incredibly uplifting, and an incredibly saddening experience overall, you know. But it does leave me with a lot of things. It leaves me with gratitude. It leaves me, you know, I count my blessings every day for the life I have, the luxury I have, the privilege I have. And, you know, as I said earlier, it can change the heartbeat. We take peace for granted. It's the norm now since the end of World War II. But it's not always be the case. The norm has been like this. The norm has been war up until very recently in human history. And I don't take it for granted anymore.
Yeah. With geopolitics, things can hang in the balance, and all it takes is for kind of the thing in Russia and Ukraine to escalate and go beyond those borders, and then NATO's involved and the United States is involved, and then we're all involved. And I like what you said about that intense fraternity between your brothers, because I guess if it's like when you look at conscription, you could be from a wealthy family, you could be from a poor family, but when you're both sitting there, you don't know who's got the flat screen TV and the latest iPhone at home or the great outfit. You're both in uniforms. You're both kind of there in that moment, and you're both fighting to survive. So it must be a great leveler.
Definitely.
For you too, you know, we hear all this stuff about kind of dark tourism. You mentioned at the start about your adrenaline pumping when you first got there. And we know that that's addictive. It can be. People who bungee jump or skydive, the thrill seekers.
Yeah.
Do you now, to a certain degree, did you start to want it and want more of the thrill and the adrenaline, get closer to the action, take more risks, want to go back?
It's a good question. Yes and no. Maybe earlier I did. I guess now I have more to lose. Now I realize I have more to lose than I did prior. I now realize I only have one life, Colin, and it's a good one. And people love me and I love them, and I'm grateful for them in my life, whether it be my wife that I married last week, my father that's still kicking around, you know, when he could not be here. and I don't want to lose that.
But you're going to find things boring now, Finn. I mean, after filming the action in Ukraine, you like what, the Bray Summer Festival? What are you going to shoot next?
I don't know. Being married to an Italian is action packed enough.
I'm going to come and film you in the house for 7 months.
You could be the TMO. You
yeah,
could be the TMO, you know.
the newlyweds. I'll bring my armored suit. Listen, it's a fascinating story, Finn. I was following it since I saw you on Primetime and RTE, and watching your stuff on social media and admiring what you did, wondering why you did what you did. Now understanding it a little bit better. Finally, as someone who knows it much more than me, you were there for 7 months. You were embedded with the soldiers and with the people. What's your best guess as to what's going to happen in Ukraine? How's it going to play out?
The way I see it, Colin, I don't think it's going to be a quick victory. Everybody that I spoke to out there, dudes there, are especially the older lads. They're preparing for the long haul. You know, they see this as a generational thing, and they're willing to die so that their kids don't have to do it. They want to settle it now. They want to finish it now, and they're willing to give their lives now so that their children that are just, you know, young kids don't have to do it in the next generation.
But isn't this Putin's long game? Because he knows the longer it goes on, you get, like anything, you get war fatigue. Yeah. And what was hot in the media, even now, I know the last time I went there last December, the hotel was not fully booked. When I went there the first 2 times, the hotel was full of journalists and it was difficult to get a room. Now the hotel was kind of half empty because there's less journalists, less attention, less political will behind it. And people are now saying in different countries, you see it online on Twitter, wait, hang on, we've got all the homeless here in Philadelphia and Chicago, huge problems of drug. Why are we sending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars? So people start to, they start to lose.
Why, Colin? Because Putin has the luxury of an authoritarian regime where he doesn't have a ballot box in 4 years, while all the other politicians in the West that support the Ukrainians through democracy, they have to think about their own home base. We might be paying for it at the petrol pump or the price of bread with inflation. The Ukrainians are paying for it in the blood and bodies of generations to come. And Putin knows this. So he has that luxury to sit tight, hang on. And if you look at any Russian conflict since the Tsar times, the first year of any Russian conflict has been an absolute shit show. And they throw bodies at the problem until they figure out their logistics. And by the time they figure out the logistics, the enemy has run out of bodies. And they have that luxury of population base and resources and weapons base and industry, coal, oil, gas, all of those things. And the areas that Putin has managed to take are the largest industrial base. I don't know if you've been to Donbass, but any single town you go to in Donbass, it is a coal mine, steel mine, factory. It's all massive industry. All of the wheat fields of the agriculture is west of the Dnipro River. Donbass is pure industry. It has 1.5 trillion euros worth of rare earth materials, minerals, oil, gas. This is the key ingredients to the longevity of launching military campaigns. You need these resources. If you lose them, you need to import it all. And that's the position Ukraine finds itself in. So Putin, of course, is playing the long game. He can weather the storm, unlike all of his counterparts in the West. So the way I see it happening is this counteroffensive is going to fail. It's going to be stalemate for the winter. Front lines aren't going to shift too much. Next spring, or somewhere around the new year, there'll be a new offensive to try and take Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. And if he manages to take those 2 final towns in the Donbass, he'll be able to turn around to the Russian population and say, we've won the war. We've liberated the Russian-speaking areas in Donbass. We have our land bridge to Crimea. And we've achieved the aims of our special military operation. That conflict will stay frozen for 10 years, just like the 2014-15 war was frozen until last year. And then there'll be a fresh round, because the fundamental realities of the geopolitics are not resolved. And those geopolitical realities are Russia needs access to the oceans, and that's what it wants. And Russia has the worst geography in the world despite its size. It's the flat Eurasian steppe. It can be invaded from so many points. And that's why Russia is so big. They had to expand their borders so far away from their capital to make invasion impossible. And that's a fundamental reality that can't be ignored, even after a ceasefire or a stalemate or 10 years of frozen conflict. There will be another round, and that's what the Ukrainians that are fighting and dying in the trenches now, they want to end it now before that can happen. So,
final question, Finn, will you go back again, or is that your time in Ukraine done?
It's a good question, Colin. I hope I am out of earshot of my wife right now. But next month, I have 3 applications for funding for my documentary that I'm applying for, 3 different funds through Screen Ireland. And just want to be clear, like, I've been, excuse the pun, alone in the trenches on this project from day one. There is nobody supporting me. Every single bit of footage or anything that you've seen has been off the sweat of my own back. Everything that you've seen is all by me. Been totally alone in it all, and I'm dying for support, absolutely dying for support. And I'm making these applications next month for my films. I basically have 3 films on my table, so I'm applying for 3 different formats for 3 different films, and whatever comes back with funding, that's the one I'll go for. And if I get the funding that I'm looking for, I have everything in place, the contacts, the fixers, a film production crew in Ukraine ready to go, pending funding. If one of those funds comes back and says, yeah, green light, then we can discuss another project in Ukraine. But for now, I can't justify my own mental health, the mental health of my family and my own wallet on this conflict anymore.
Well, whether it comes now or in the future, you are the man who has the extraordinary footage on the hard drives in front of you. You're the one who was there. You're the person who saw it. You were there for 7 months, not like some journalists, including myself, who go in for a while and come back out. So I'm sure it will be incredibly useful. You've captured a moment in history, so it's extremely valuable, and it's a fascinating story. Finn Boylan, thank you so much for sharing it with me.
No worries, Colin. Thanks for having me on and giving me the gift to yarn on a little bit more than most radio interviews would give me. So